You're nobody. You'll live in the basement like a rat, he kept repeating. I was saving money to rent a place. He knew my password, and one day he withdrew everything, leaving me with nothing. I started saving when I turned 18. Every dollar I earned went straight into that account. Working double shifts at the local diner, picking up odd jobs around the neighborhood, selling stuff I didn't need anymore. The numbers slowly climbed, $50, then $100, then $500. Each deposit felt like a small victory, a step closer to freedom from the constant humiliation that had become my daily routine. Living under his roof meant enduring his verbal attacks every single day. He'd wait until the neighbors were outside working in their yards, then he'd start yelling at me through the open windows. The whole street could hear him calling me worthless, telling anyone within earshot that I was a burden he couldn't wait to get rid of. Mrs. Johnson next door would always look away when I passed by her house, probably embarrassed for me. The mailman started avoiding eye contact too. Everyone knew what was happening, but nobody said anything. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation. It was how he'd corner me in the kitchen during dinner, listing all the ways I'd disappointed him that day. How I'd loaded the dishwasher wrong, how I'd forgotten to take out the trash exactly when he wanted it done, how I breathed too loud while he was watching his shows. He had this way of making everything feel like a personal attack against him, like my very existence was some kind of deliberate insult. But I kept saving. $300 became $600. $600 became $900. I started looking at apartments online, calculating how much I'd need for first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, utility setup. The math was tight, but I figured I could make it work with about $1,500. That became my target number, written on a sticky note hidden inside my old textbook. The closer I got to my goal, the more real it felt. I started imagining what it would be like to come home to my own space, to eat dinner without someone critiquing every bite I took, to watch whatever I wanted on TV without permission. Simple things that most people take for granted felt like impossible luxuries to me. Just the thought of closing a door and knowing nobody would burst through it uninvited made my chest feel lighter. When I hit $1,400, I started seriously apartment hunting. Found a small studio about 20 minutes away that fit my budget perfectly. The landlord seemed decent enough during our phone conversation, said I could come look at it on Saturday and potentially sign the lease the same day if everything worked out. I scheduled the appointment for 2 in the afternoon, giving myself enough time to transfer the money from savings to checking that morning. Friday night, I could barely sleep. I kept checking my phone to make sure my alarm was set, going over my mental checklist of everything I needed to bring to the apartment viewing. I'd already filled out most of the application paperwork, had my references ready, even picked out which few belongings I'd take with me initially. The rest could wait until I was more settled. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, but I felt more optimistic than I had in months. I made coffee quietly, not wanting to wake him up and risk starting the day with another lecture about something. The bank app on my phone showed my savings account balance, $1,412. More than enough to get started. But when I tried to transfer the money to my checking account, the screen showed an error message. Insufficient funds. I refreshed the page, thinking it was just a glitch. Same message. My heart started racing as I logged out and back in again, hoping somehow the numbers would correct themselves. The savings account balance showed $8.37. I stared at the screen for probably 5 full minutes, not understanding what I was seeing. $1,400 doesn't just vanish overnight. Banks don't make mistakes that big. I called their customer service line immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. The representative was polite but matter-of-fact as she walked through my recent transaction history. 3 withdrawals yesterday afternoon, she explained. All authorized using my login credentials. 2 transfers of $500 each, and 1 transfer of $404, all going to an external account ending in 7429. I recognized those last 4 digits immediately. His account number was printed on statements that he left scattered around the kitchen table for weeks at a time. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up right there on the spot. The bank representative asked if I wanted to dispute the transactions, but what could I say? The transfers were made using my own login information from my own computer, probably while I was at work the day before. Technically, nothing about it looked fraudulent from their perspective. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for almost an hour, just staring at the coffee mug in my hands. The apartment viewing was in 3 hours, and I had $8 to my name. Months of planning, months of hope, months of imagining a different life, all gone because he knew a password I'd been too trusting to change. When he finally came downstairs around 11, I was still sitting at the kitchen table. He poured himself coffee like nothing had happened, started reading something on his phone, completely ignoring my presence. I waited for him to acknowledge what he'd done, maybe offer some kind of explanation or apology. But he just sat there, scrolling through whatever was on his screen. Finally, I asked him about the money. Didn't accuse him directly, just said I'd noticed some transactions I didn't remember making and wondered if he knew anything about it. He didn't even look up from his phone when he answered. Said it was compensation for all the money he'd spent on me over the years. Food, electricity, water, rent, all the basic necessities that any parent provides for their child. He was now framing as debts I owed him. He made it sound like I'd been living in luxury at his expense, instead of walking on eggshells in a house where I was constantly reminded how unwanted I was. The casual way he said it was almost worse than the theft itself. Like taking my money was the most natural thing in the world, like I should have expected it, like I was stupid for thinking I deserved to keep what I'd earned. I asked him about his debts, the ones he'd mentioned needing compensation for. Turns out he'd been gambling online for months, running up credit card balances and borrowing money from people I'd never heard of. My savings account had become his emergency fund without my knowledge or consent. He'd been planning this for weeks, just waiting for the balance to get high enough to make it worthwhile. The apartment viewing came and went without me. I called the landlord to cancel, made up some excuse about a family emergency. He was understanding but mentioned he had other interested renters, so the place probably wouldn't be available if I wanted to reschedule. Another door closing, another opportunity lost. That afternoon, I started looking up information about shelters and transitional housing programs in the area. The idea of staying in the house after what he'd done felt impossible, but I also couldn't afford to go anywhere else. $8 doesn't get you very far when you're starting from scratch. Update 1. The next few days were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. I kept going to work, kept pretending everything was normal, but inside I felt completely hollow. Every time I looked at him, I remembered how easily he destroyed months of effort without a second thought. The worst part was how he acted like nothing had changed between us, still making his usual comments about my failures and shortcomings as if he hadn't just stolen my chance at independence. I started sleeping in the basement, partly because I couldn't stand being on the same floor as him, and partly because I was already getting used to the idea of living in less comfortable spaces. The basement was cold and damp, with a concrete floor and small windows that barely let in any light. It felt fitting somehow, like I was already practicing for whatever came next. During my lunch breaks at work, I'd use the computer in the break room to research my options. Homeless shelters had waiting lists and strict rules about how long you could stay. Transitional housing programs required applications and background checks that could take weeks to process. Everything seemed designed for people who had more resources and stability than I did. But then I found something unexpected. A program downtown that specifically helped young adults aging out of difficult family situations. They provided temporary housing, job placement assistance, and most importantly, they had space available immediately for people in crisis situations. The catch was that you had to commit to their full program, which included mandatory life skills workshops and regular check-ins with a case manager. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than staying where I was. I called them during my break on Thursday and explained my situation as best I could without going into too many personal details. The intake coordinator listened patiently and scheduled me for an assessment the following afternoon. That evening, I started quietly packing my belongings. I didn't have much: some clothes, a few books, my laptop, and a small box of things that had sentimental value. Everything fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. As I was folding my clothes, I found the sticky note with my savings goal written on it. $1,500. Such a small number that had felt so huge when I was working toward it. I decided not to tell him I was leaving. Part of it was wanting to avoid another confrontation, but mostly I realized he didn't deserve an explanation. He'd made his choice when he took my money. Now I was making mine. Friday after work, I went straight to the program downtown instead of going home. The building was older but well-maintained, with a small lobby and offices on the first floor. The intake coordinator was a woman about my mom's age who had this way of asking questions that felt supportive rather than intrusive. She explained how the program worked, what the expectations were, and what kind of support they could provide. The housing was dormitory style, with shared rooms and common areas, but it was clean and safe. More importantly, it was mine for as long as I needed it, up to 6 months while I got back on my feet. They even had connections with local employers who were willing to work with people in transitional situations. I signed the paperwork that afternoon and moved in the same day. My roommate was another guy around my age who'd been in the program for about 2 months. He was working toward getting his own place and seemed genuinely happy to be there. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe things could actually get better. That night, I sent him a text message letting him know I'd moved out and wouldn't be coming back. I didn't ask for my money back or try to explain why I'd left. Just a simple message saying I was safe and didn't want any contact going forward. He never responded. Update 2. Living in the transitional housing program was nothing like what I'd expected. The structure was actually comforting after months of walking on eggshells at home. There were rules, but they made sense and applied to everyone equally. Lights out at 11 on weeknights, keep common areas clean, attend your scheduled meetings with your case manager. Simple, clear expectations that nobody changed arbitrarily based on their mood. My case manager turned out to be incredibly helpful in ways I hadn't anticipated. She didn't just focus on finding me permanent housing. She helped me think about what I actually wanted my life to look like in the long term. We worked on budgeting, sure, but also on things like setting boundaries with difficult people and recognizing manipulation tactics. It was like learning a completely different language for navigating relationships. The job placement program connected me with a position at a local warehouse that paid significantly better than the diner. The work was physically demanding, but the management treated employees with basic respect, and there were opportunities for overtime if I wanted extra money. For the first time in my life, I was earning enough to actually build savings while covering my basic expenses. But the real turning point came about 6 weeks into the program, when I got an unexpected phone call at work. It was him, and he sounded different than I'd ever heard him before. Panicked, almost desperate. He started the conversation by asking where I was living. Said he'd been by the shelter looking for me, but they wouldn't give him any information. Then he told me why he was calling. Apparently, the people he owed money to weren't satisfied with the partial payment he'd made using my savings. They wanted the full amount, plus interest, plus penalties for being late. He was facing some serious consequences if he couldn't come up with another few $1,000s within the next week. He asked if I could help him out, maybe co-sign for a loan or let him use my address for some kind of financial application. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Here was someone who had stolen my money and destroyed my plans, now asking me to put myself at financial risk to solve the problems he'd created with that same stolen money. I told him no. Not angrily, not with a long explanation about why his request was inappropriate. Just a simple, clear no. That's when his tone shifted back to the familiar pattern of insults and threats. I was selfish, ungrateful, heartless. How could I abandon family when they needed help? Didn't I understand that his problems were partly my fault for being such a burden over the years? But something had changed in how I heard those words. Maybe it was the counseling sessions, maybe it was just the distance and perspective, but his attempts at manipulation sounded hollow and desperate rather than authoritative. I realized that his power over me had always been based on my belief that I needed his approval or support to survive. Now that I was managing fine without him, those words couldn't hurt me the same way. I hung up without saying anything else and blocked his number immediately. The incident actually motivated me to work even harder on building my independence. I started picking up extra shifts whenever they were available, sometimes working 6 days a week when the warehouse was busy. The money added up faster than I'd expected, and by the end of my 3rd month in the program, I had enough saved for a security deposit and first month's rent on a small apartment. My case manager helped me look at places that fit my budget and timeline. We found a studio apartment about 15 minutes from work, in a building with mostly working professionals who kept to themselves. The landlord was straightforward during the application process. No games, no unreasonable demands, just standard paperwork and references. I signed the lease on a Tuesday and moved in that weekend. My roommate from the transitional housing helped me move my few belongings, and a couple other people from the program stopped by with small housewarming gifts. A coffee maker, some basic dishes, a small plant for the windowsill. It wasn't much, but it felt like the most generous support I'd ever received. Final update. It's been just over a year since I moved into my own place, and I barely recognized the person I was when this whole situation started. The apartment isn't fancy, just a studio with basic appliances and furniture I've accumulated piece by piece, but it's completely mine. Nobody yells at me through the windows, nobody criticizes how I load the dishwasher. Nobody can take away what I've built just because they feel like it. The warehouse job turned into something more substantial than I'd expected. After 6 months, they promoted me to a supervisor position with better pay and benefits. It's not glamorous work, but the management team recognizes effort and treats people fairly. I've been able to build up savings again, this time in an account that only I have access to. But the real change has been internal. I used to spend so much energy trying to anticipate his moods, walking on eggshells, modifying my behavior to avoid setting him off. Now I make decisions based on what makes sense for my life, not on what might prevent someone else from having an emotional outburst. It's a completely different way of existing in the world. A few months ago, I got another phone call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was him again, but this time he sounded completely defeated. He'd lost the house, couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments after his other debts caught up with him. He was living in his car, bouncing between different friends' couches, trying to figure out his next move. He wasn't calling to ask for money this time. He was calling to tell me that he understood now what he'd put me through, and that he was sorry for everything that had happened between us. The apology felt genuine, but it also felt like something he needed to say for his own peace of mind rather than something I needed to hear for mine. I listened to what he had to say, acknowledged that I appreciated him reaching out, but I didn't offer to help or suggest that we try to rebuild our relationship. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is accept that someone played a destructive role in your life and move forward without them. The conversation was short and civil, and when it ended, I felt mostly indifferent. Not angry, not sad, not vindicated. Just neutral. He was no longer a source of fear or frustration in my life. He was just someone I used to know who had made some very poor choices. I've been thinking lately about how much time I wasted believing his version of who I was and what I was capable of. All those years of being told I was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything, that I was destined to fail at whatever I tried. It's remarkable how quickly those messages lose their power once you start proving them wrong through your own actions. The apartment lease is up for renewal next month, and I'm planning to stay for another year. I like the neighborhood. I like having my own space, and I've built a comfortable routine that works for me. I've even started thinking about longer-term goals, maybe taking some classes to develop new skills, maybe saving up for a better car, maybe eventually moving to a larger place. These aren't earth-shattering ambitions, but they're mine. Nobody can take them away from me or use them against me. Nobody can empty my bank account and destroy months of planning on a whim. The security of knowing that my efforts will benefit me, and only me, has been worth every difficult moment of this past year. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd never left, if I just accepted that stolen money as the cost of keeping peace in the house. I'd probably still be there, still saving money that wasn't really mine, still believing that I deserved to be treated poorly because I was somehow fundamentally flawed. Instead, I'm sitting in my own apartment, planning my own future, making my own decisions about how to spend my time and money. It's a simple life, but it's completely authentic to who I actually am rather than who someone else told me I should be. The best part is the quiet. Not just the absence of yelling and criticism, but the deeper quiet that comes from not having to constantly defend your right to exist peacefully. I can read a book without someone commenting on it. I can cook dinner without someone critiquing my choices. I can just be, without having to justify or explain or apologize for taking up space in the world. That's worth more than any amount of money he could have stolen.